Again, thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give it another minute or so before we start. Just so everyone knows, we are live on Facebook and we are recording the session as well, because I know many people will want to watch it who can't unfortunately join us in person right now. So I think it's 2 minutes past, and we want to honor all of you who came on time. We do not believe in Indian standard timing at Bhumi Global. We like to start on time. And so thank you for joining us today for this webinar in celebration of Earth Day, which is this coming Friday. So this week is known as Earth Week, and we at Bhumi Global really believe that every day and every week should be an Earth Day or an Earth Week. My name is Gopal Patel. I am the co-founder and director of Bhumi Global, and I have with me a great panel of speakers to discuss and share their insights and their experiences in terms of how to engage and mobilize people for environmental action. The webinar today will be for an hour. I'll give a short presentation on some of our work. And then we'll have a discussion with the panelists, and then we'll round out with time for discussion. So if you do have any questions during the session, please put them in the chat box so we can get to them. And please also, if you can, you're welcome to put on your cameras, and also in the chat, put your name, where you're calling in from, what you do for a living, what you had for dinner, any pertinent information that you feel that you want to share with us this evening. We are all family here tonight. So Bhumi Global, we work with Hindu groups across the world, from India to Africa, Europe, the United States, North America, to engage, mobilize, and empower people for environmental action. And last year, we conducted the first ever global survey on Hindu understandings about the environment, because we felt it was important, as we engage Hindus globally to address environmental issues, that we first understood what Hindus think and believe and are willing to do to care for Mother Earth. And so we conducted the survey last summer, and I want to share with you some of the key findings that came out of that survey. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. So this was the International Hindu Environmental Survey for 2021. And really, as I said, we wanted to understand Hindu attitudes when it comes to the environment. We wanted to understand what Hindus believe are the biggest environmental issues that need addressing. And crucially, we wanted to help understand and make sure that these Hindu views and perspectives on the environment, that they shape global grassroots action within Hindu communities, and also shape political advocacy in forums such as the United Nations and in other spaces as well. So the survey ran from June to August 2021 last year. We had over 500 responses from 28 countries. And as I said, it was the first ever survey of its kind. We had good geographical representation. As you can imagine, the majority of participants were from the United States, India, closely followed by the United Kingdom, where I'm from. But also a significant number from South Africa, Canada, and a number of other countries as well, such as Australia, countries in the Middle East, and places such as Thailand and Singapore. We had good age representation. The bulk were from the 18 to 24 age group, and then the 25 to 34 close behind that, and then the 17 and under. And so it was a large youth skew in the data that we collected, and that was to be expected, because this was conducted online and promoted primarily through social media such as Instagram and Facebook. And the gender split was about 50-50 as well, so it was good to see that we got a good representation of the genders. So in terms of the key findings that came out of the survey, we asked people what their top 5 concerns were when it comes to environmental issues. And this is what we found. We found the first one was water pollution, followed by deforestation, biodiversity loss, climate change, and then air pollution. And this was really interesting for us, and I'll come to it in a bit later, why I think it's really interesting that water pollution, deforestation, and biodiversity came in the top 3, and climate change was 4th. But those were the top 5 issues that people said that they were worried about. 99% of all participants said that they agreed or strongly agreed that environmental issues need to be urgently addressed. And so that was great for us to hear that Hindus across the world really do believe that the environment is something that cannot wait, that this is something that is a pressing concern for them. And we found that 98% are concerned or very concerned. So we see, high ambition when it comes to wanting to address the issues urgently, and a high level of concern as well about environmental issues. And then this was also very interesting and really good to see, was that 95% of all the participants are either comfortable or very comfortable adapting their lifestyles to help the environment. And so these 3 things combined in terms of the urgency, the level of concern, and the fact that Hindus in the survey were willing to change their own lives to help the environment are really good signs for the Hindu community globally, that we are positioned in a way to really mobilize and move into action in really significant ways. When we asked people what they would be willing to do to care for the earth, we found some great responses. Obviously, becoming vegetarian, vegan within the Hindu community was very high up there, but also things such as buying more locally sourced products, to stop buying fast fashion, to use more public transportation and to walk and cycle. It was great to see that a lot of people wanting to grow their own vegetables or invest in eco-friendly technologies. So right across the board, we saw that Hindus in the survey were willing to do a range of things in their own personal day-to-day lives and in their communities to mitigate and minimize the impact that they're having on the environment. And then when we asked them what really influenced their understanding of environmental issues, we found, which wasn't so much of a surprise, that it was really the internet and social media where most of the participants got the information about environmental issues. And this was really directed by their own interest and education. What was interesting for us as a faith-based organization was that religious communities or family and friends wasn't so important when it came to how they understood environmental issues. It was really online social media where they got most of their information. And then finally, when we asked them, what would help them learn more about environmental issues, what was really interesting, in addition to social media, is that people really wanted to be connected to local groups and local leaders, and also see examples of good practice and leadership by others. And so although they are looking online for the education, they are looking for in-person connection in order to really move and scale up the activism and the advocacy that they're doing. And we found that to be really interesting, that the coupling of the online and the real as well. So just to reflect some of the key findings that we had coming out of this survey, was that the Hindus who participated in this really felt that the crisis is interconnected, that no one issue such as climate change or biodiversity or pollution, no single issue was an outright winner, shall we say, that all of them got around the same amount of votes. And so we really need to understand from a Hindu perspective that Hindus are seeing climate change, biodiversity, and pollution as, let's say, one big concern with different strands to it, that these crises are interconnected. As I said earlier, the Hindus that participated in the survey also really felt that urgent action is required, that piecemeal solutions or waiting is not a solution for them. They want urgent action now, and that they are willing to change. And I think this really speaks to the element of Hinduism which puts an emphasis on personal responsibility, that Hindus aren't necessarily looking for others to change or for governments to change or for the private sector to change, but that the Hindus that are part of this survey really feel like they want to make a meaningful change in their own lives to address the environmental crisis. And then finally, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that education is key, that they are hungry for education, they are self-directed in their understanding about environmental concerns, and they want more leadership, they want more training, they want more people to look up to see how Hindu environmental leadership looks like and what other people can do. So that was our survey. I'm very, very grateful to all of you who participated in that. As I said, we'd had over 500 people globally, the first ever survey of its kind. And so very thankful to all of you who participated in that. Also thankful to the whole team at Bhumi Global and our volunteers who helped with that, one of whom is Falisha Verma, who's on the call tonight, but also Riddhi Takara, who's based in London, also helped put the survey together. If you go to our website, bhumiglobal.org, you can download and look at the survey results for yourself, and you'll be able to share those within your communities as well. So what I want to do now is I want to bring in our really wonderful panel of speakers to really dive a bit more into the survey results and to try and get a bit more of a sense from them what's going on in their own lives and in their communities when it comes to environmental issues. I'm very excited for the speakers that we have this evening. We have Sujane Kandasamy, who is the co-founder and the director of education at the Starfish Canada, based in Canada. We also have Nidhi Khanna, who is the senior regional online organizer for the Sierra Club, and she's based in New York City. Nidhi, great to have you with us. And then we also have Falisha Verma, who is a medical student and a volunteer for us here at Bhumi Global and helped share the survey with some of her friends. And she's living up the road from me in lovely New Jersey. So great to have you with us, Falisha. So Sujane, Nidhi, Falisha, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this conversation around Earth Day and Hindu approaches to caring for the earth, and in the context a little bit of the survey that we did as well, and the results we went through. I would just love to go around and just have initial reflections from all of you on what Earth Day means for you, and also any reflections you have on the findings that we had from the survey. And I would love to, Sujane, I would love to start with you.
Amazing. Thank you, Gopal. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I think for me, every day is Earth Day, as you said earlier. So to have a day that celebrates kind of our commitment to the environment, I feel is something that should be, extended over the calendar year for sure, and should be part of our lives in some sense on a day-to-day basis. But one thing that I do appreciate about having like a specific day dedicated is that it really does help to build some momentum and create conversation and like do an extra little bit of work around strengthening the dialogue around some important conversations. And that's why I'm grateful to have the opportunity to participate in different activities that relate to that, to Earth Day. So thanks again for having me. And in terms of your other question of about the survey results, when I was reflecting on the survey, I think I connected to kind of two key points. One around the question of what would you be willing to do to care for the environment? And the answers relating to education being key certainly is something that resonated with me, as my work with the Starfish Canada involves that. That is my entire portfolio, is working with young people to really amplify solutions-based dialogue. And much of that is education and falls under that space. And from what I know, young people, older people that I've seen are, certainly interested in participating in that conversation. And I think what it does is that it gives people a platform to engage in informed conversations. And a lot of the work that we do, like, we know that the challenges are there. We know environmental crises are around us, but that can also lead to, some anxiety or some confusion or some added pressure in our lives. So my effort has always been around taking that and, minimizing that in some sense, but still bringing it to life, but really focusing on the solution part, which is where I connected to the second piece of that question, which is where individual actions, were a key part of that, and people were willing to engage in activities involving conserving energy and recycling and reducing their use of single-use plastics. And I think those two are two threads of the same tapestry and kind of interweave together, because when you are more educated about your surroundings, you can make the changes in your daily life. And another thing about that, I think, is also that there might be this slight misconception that, individual actions may not add up. But I think, certainly it is a little bit of a conversation to be had, but it does add up, and every little bit counts, and collectively, we're part of this landscape together, right? And every little bit does add up and does make a difference. I just wanted to touch on one point, and cut me off if I'm going on too much. But another part of the survey that resonated with me was around the question of what would help you learn more about environmental issues, and one of the top answers were examples of good practice and leadership by others, and I think that just summarizes kind of how I feel about all of this, is that the crises and the challenges are there, but if we can focus on the great work that's being done and really put a spotlight to that and provide a platform for those stories to shine and be told and to be shared, I think there's lots of opportunities there for all of us to engage in a positive way and also be part of the solution.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sujane. There's so much there that I want to pick up on and ask you more, but I'm going to control myself, and we'll go to Falisha and then Nidhi, then I'll come back to you in a bit. So Falisha, I would love to hear your thoughts. What does Earth Day or Earth Week mean for you? And you were involved in asking some of your friends to participate in the survey. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your reflections on the survey results as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Earth Day is always a great time for me to check myself and see if I'm still committed to caring for the environment just as much on any other day of the week. I do notice that there are some times where I really don't care about the environment, and it's important for me to check myself and keep it real with myself instead of thinking that I'm always committed to this cause, because that's not necessarily the case. And so I remember when I shared this link with my friends, a lot of them were actually very intrigued by this. And so they wanted to have a whole conversation. I remember getting on group FaceTime and someone brought up the survey. And so all of us collectively agreed that fast fashion has to be one of the #1 ways that people want to take action, because a lot of people were already taking action against fast fashion after the Rana Plaza building collapse back in 2013, I believe. And so we really thought the fast fashion was going to be one of the top 5 ways. And so when I did see the survey results, I was surprised that it wasn't. And the interesting thing is, because social media was one of the #1 ways that influences people's perspectives on the environment. I remember that on social media, there were massive calls to protest against certain companies and boycott them because they were involved in the building collapse, or they were benefiting off of the labor of Bangladeshi women. So again, I was really surprised that it wasn't top 5. And the majority of Hindus are South Asian. So again, that was just really surprising for me. But what was not surprising for me at all was seeing that turning off lights, electronics, and conserving energy is something that people are willing to do, because on Earth Day, in school, we would always have a group of environmentalists come in and they would teach us, hey, turn off the lights, don't use plastic, recycle. So these are values that we grew up learning in school, in our homes, and I'm not surprised that it reflected in the survey. But it was really wholesome to see that people are still doing the same things that they were doing as children into their adulthood.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, great to see the that from an early age, that what we teach children really can have an impact in later life as well. Nidhi, I'd love to ask the same questions to you. What does this day or week mean to you, and any thoughts or reflections on the findings of the survey?
Yeah, definitely. So I wouldn't be properly representing the Sierra Club if I didn't think Earth Day was an important day. Sierra Club, for those who don't know, is one of the largest environmental organizations and oldest environmental organizations in the country. It started from focusing on conservation, but over the years has evolved in directly trying to influence environmental policy. As someone who grew up as Hindu, we're often taught, to always recycle, make use of all the resources we have. It wasn't a odd concept to us to bring our own bags to the grocery store, because that's what many of our relatives did in India. Now it's great that it's gaining more popularity in cities across the country, and now people are actually actively thinking about making sure they're conserving plastic and using reusable items. Something that was interesting to me in this survey was seeing that people focused on water and air, and climate change was one of the least, things in their mind. And something interesting about climate change, I know that term, a lot of people aren't sure what that exactly means. How do we tackle that? But air and water are things that are very tangible, and people can understand, how do we have clean air? How do we fix the waterways? So that was really interesting to me to see that in the survey. And also how social media is one of the places, and the internet, where people get most of their information, which to me, as someone who does work in digital, I see that all the time. People are influenced by what's being shared on social media and in digital spaces, which can be a really powerful tool to connect us all and find those resources. But then at the same time, it does worry me with education. What are people reading? So it's our job to make sure we're educating people the right way, and making sure our voices are louder and more amplified, to make sure people get informed information that will help them make the right decisions to protect the planet and make sure they are living the values of Earth Day every day.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, and I also was surprised by the fact that climate change wasn't the number one thing. And I think, as you said, climate change is often used as a catch-all term to mean all environmental issues. And so, yeah, like water, air are much more tangible. And also because the survey was we had a lot of participants from India, where we know, water stress and air pollution is a real concern for them there. Not that it isn't for us here in the United States or other parts of the world, but we know in India that it has significant challenges when it comes to air and water pollution. I wanted to pick up something that Sujane, I think you picked up on, and I want to ask it to Falisha if I can, which is around, one thing that people said is that they want to see leadership, or they want to see examples of good practice. And you being our voice of the youth this evening, what leadership would you like to see, or are you seeing from within the Hindu community that is inspiring you or your peers to take action on environmental issues?
One thing that I've been seeing a lot more this past year is the Hindu presence on social media. I've seen my friends surprisingly share Hindu organizations posts about the environment, Bhumi Global, of course, being one of them. And so I'm really glad that we're really making ourselves known, because we've been committed to the environmental cause for the beginning of time, but we've never really shown that we are truly committed to it. And I feel like now people are starting to see that. But in terms of more leadership, right? Going based on the survey, I saw that a little less than 50% of people said that campaigns would help them learn about the environment. So this is a very significant number, right? And I feel like this is especially true for my generation, because we're so active on social media and we're constantly coming across negative news. And sometimes it does feel like there's more negative news out there than positive, right? And that does leave us as 20-year-olds feeling very helpless, because how can a 20-year-old possibly solve climate change, right? So I'd love to see more campaigns with action steps, such as signing petitions, sending out emails. My generation loves to protest, so we'd love to see action items like that, because we do want to get involved. We do have the passion for that.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all kind of inching our ways to being more protest driven, because there's just a lot to protest these days. And I'm wondering, Falisha, is there a desire or interest in your peer group around like political advocacy, lobbying governments, to kind of be stronger when it comes to environmental issues? Is because that didn't come out so strongly in the survey, and in our experience at Bhumi Global, we find that political advocacy on the environment is not as strong as personal action or campaigning. And so I'm just wondering if you can reflect a little bit on that and kind of what your experience is with your friends when it comes to advocacy work.
I think a lot of people like to remain anonymous when they do political advocacy. So sometimes just putting yourself out there can be scary for some people. But when it comes to just making personal changes, that's relatively easy. The issue is with personal change, when you have something like Veganuary, for example, right? People are committing to a personal change. And I think that we can take similar initiatives, of course, like not copy them, but I do think that similar initiatives will really help people in my generation get involved, right? But when it does come to political advocacy, there is a large need for that. There are some people who are very passionate in that way. They do like to express themselves politically. And I think the more common ways of doing this is like sending an email to your senator or to your representative. And that's something where you're not entirely putting yourself out there, but you are having your voice heard. And I think that's really what my generation does best. And that's what we'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, political advocacy can take, shape in a number of different ways. You can go, to DC and lobby in person, or you can write your senator and so on. And Nidhi, I want to pick this up with you in a second, but I'd like to bring in Sujane here, because one thing that's coming out, which is around discussion and conversation, and how to normalize these discussions, because obviously the survey was skewed towards more younger people because it was mainly done online, and be interesting to know if there's a generational gap here within the Hindu community. Obviously that requires some further research. But I'm just wondering, Sujane, like how do we normalize conversations around climate change and biodiversity? Because as Falisha was saying, they're not cheery topics. They're not necessarily something you want to bring up at the dinner table. So what's the best way to do it with our friends or our parents or even our children? Any tips you have for that?
Great question. And I certainly agree that it's not always a cheery topic. It can be sometimes a complex conversation as well. In my opinion, I think one way that we can normalize such conversations is to and I'm really an advocate for this, is like focus on the solutions. And of course, like the education piece and the reason why and the significance of taking some action is part of that conversation. But I think if we can focus on like creating empathy around the challenge, rather than like specifically what the challenge is, like kind of more empathy driven, like values based conversations that really build on the solutions, is one way to certainly normalize it and have a conversation that actually leads somewhere, rather than leading to just confusion or anxiety. And I've talked to like many people, and I have 2 young children, but many of my friends, like they're worried about bringing children into the world because of the environmental debt that they will acquire over the next generations or possibly sooner, and lots of anxiety that has come with that. And not to say that I don't have those anxieties and fears, I do, but I think for me, like I try to focus on the solutions and the role that we can play, and try to really build that as the core of the conversation. And a funny thing, my 2.5-year-old the other day, like he saw the car exhaust and just went, oh no. So, like kids can recognize, that is something, right? That is something there, and it's an opportunity to, of course, he's a bit too young to start the conversation, but if he was a bit older, like that would have been a great opportunity for me to really build on what that is, and like how we can even play a positive role in whatever that topic is, right? So I guess, using the world around us to conversate, but certainly focusing on the solutions and building empathy. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel like things affect us, and that's why it's so hard. A lot of things are out of sight, out of mind, especially with the way that we measure some of these impacts. Like, it's not always a way that people can connect to that. And the reason that resonates with me is I recently read an article where, if somebody was, saying that, the way that we measure carbon is out of sight, out of mind. Like, it's not a like a lay way of conversating about that. But if we converted that into like number of plastic straws, like, would people change their mind about the impact? And I think that's where I'm really going with, like, kind of the empathy driven like approach, like using different tools to make it more real for you and for your community and those around you.
Yeah, I love those suggestions, like I love how you said empathy driven. I love that, and focusing on solutions and making it tangible and real and relative and relatable for people, I think is really important. Nidhi, I want to bring you in now, because you work in you do a kind of work which is maybe not so familiar with a lot of people, which is called organizing. And I only came across that term a few years ago, and I'm still getting my head around how it works and how to do it effectively. And so, we're talking about people are interested in the environment. Sujane was just sharing how to have conversations with people. And so we're concerned, we've had the conversations, people are ready to do something. And that's where organizing comes in. So could you just explain a little bit about, what is organizing, and, and specifically your work in digital organizing, and how is it helpful to address environmental issues?
Yeah, so what's great is folks on this panel already started to talk about key components of organizing. Some of organizing starts with telling your personal story and relating an issue on a personal level to folks where they can understand and empathize, and they get motivated to take action. Falisha mentioned, reaching out to your members of Congress or your senator and protesting, and that helps make change. So organizing is supposed to lead to some kind of impactful change, whether it's policy or something even simple, like if you want to get rid of plastic in your school cafeteria. In order to have that policy implemented, you need to basically start a campaign and start building coalitions and relationships and getting buy-in in order to move the needle on whatever you want to do. So in organizing, and whether it's in environmentalism or other kinds of issue, you need to start forming coalitions, talking to other folks in your community that care about particular issues, and working with coalition groups groups like the Sierra Club or Bhumi Global that want to focus on those issues. So work in digital work. What's great is now digital, thanks to the pandemic, people are starting to realize how impactful digital organizing can be. You can use social media to help influence change. You can reach out to your members of Congress and tell them, we want to make sure you're protecting the Clean Water Act, or making sure our airways are not polluted by enacting this legislation. You can make calls to your members of Congress, or even gas companies, to let them know that, your practices are unfair and this is hurting folks in the community. And maybe coal plants are burning fossil fuels in a community where more children are getting asthma. You want to bring awareness to those issues. You can organize in many ways. You can send a letter to the editor and have newspapers highlight these issues, get press attention. So all these different things are part of organizing. It's just reaching folks in different spaces, whether it's a digital space, whether it's print media, and I always tell folks, you don't have to be, part of an organization, a member of working as a staffer or a member of a group in order to organize. Anybody can organize, and you're never too old or never too young to take action in your community. And that's where that change will happen, and whether it's big or small.
That's great. It's really helpful, because I think a lot of us, whether it comes to environmental issues or other issues, that we're passionate about, we learn about it, we get really excited about it. We tell some other people, and maybe we convince them to get excited. But I think a lot of us get stuck in terms of, okay, what's next? And I think your suggestions there about getting buy-in from people, building relationships and partnerships, and just really just going out there and like talking to people in a kind of a strategic way, as you said, to move the needle forward, can really move some of these issues forward. I want to make sure that we have time for discussion and questions from all the participants and everyone who's been joining here tonight. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, please do put them in the chat box. We will hopefully, we will get around to getting to those. So please do put those in the chat box, and so we can have a bit of a discussion from the audience. One thing I wanted to bring up, and Nidhi, back to you, is if like all of us here are in North America, most of us here are in the United States, and one issue that's really really important here for us at Bhumi Global and for a lot of environmental organizations in the United States is issues around environmental justice and environmental racism. And that's an issue I think maybe a lot of people in the Hindu community may be not fully aware of what that is. But we see that issues here in the United States around environmental racism and environmental justice are extrapolated on a global level as well, where you see that communities who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change are the ones who have the least resource or capacity to kind of address them, and are least responsible for those as well. And so I'm wondering if you could, because I know you work on issues around coal here in the United States, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about what is environmental racism, and what do you feel the Hindu community in the United States could do to help address that issue?
Sure. So environmental racism, the term was coined in like the 1980s in the United States, and it focused on all the policies and practices that usually unjustly impact communities of color. So a lot of those root causes include like cheap land, lack of political will. You often see the way cities are built in the United States, urban and suburban, where a lot of times in most cities and urban communities, communities of color are usually placed near, let's say, landfills or places where there's going to be more environmental toxins released in the air. And what often happens is, like in the work that I do, we look at a lot of communities around the United States where people live near coal plants, and unfairly, unjustly, a lot of those are communities of color. So it impacts their health. Children can have developed breathing problems, neurodisabilities, and as for many Hindus, maybe this is not something that we see every day in the United States, but it's something that we should take action and care about. Injustice somewhere is injustice to all. And if we often look at, historical movements in the United States, for example, the civil rights movement, a lot of time during that time, many South Asians would come to were not able to come to the United States because bans on immigration. But during that time, during the civil rights movement, African Americans fought for civil rights. And in that time, that communities of color were also allowed to then immigrate to the United States. So they were standing in solidarity with us. And it's important that many of the communities of color that are unfairly impacted, we also stand in solidarity with them now, because their fight is our fight. And if we are, for instance, many members of our community are often in the health practice. Many pediatricians may have patients who live in these areas where children will develop these asthma, neurodisabilities, and we need to study the impacts of, what is it like to live down a coal plant where there's runoff and children are drinking water that's polluted? What is the impacts of them later on in life during their development? And, we even saw in New Jersey, there was a recent case where students found a bunch of folks were getting cancer and developing tumors because of the environmental impact. So these are all interconnected. And in order to make that change, we need to make sure that we are not only advocating for folks that cannot advocate for themselves, but then also studying the impacts of, this is going to impact all of us, whether we're near it or far removed from it, because we are a global society. And, we see even environmental racism is not just local to the United States. We see that back home, in India, there's a lot of factories that are built from countries like the United States, and they're not thinking about the way runoff and, pollution is impacting our friends and family back at home. So this is interconnected to, whether we're in this country or whether we're back home. And it's something we need to think about when we're implementing and trying to change the policies and making sure we're leaving a better environment for all of us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nidhi. It's so important for us at Bhumi Global, and I think for the Hindu community to be aware of these issues, because oftentimes they are out of sight, out of mind, as was being said earlier. And, we may hear like some of the headline issues around like, the Flint water crisis from a number of years ago, which I believe is still not fully resolved, although I could be wrong. And then other parts of the country, such as I just found out in New Orleans, there's an area in New Orleans called Cancer Alley, where there's a petrochemical plant, and the rates of cancer there are just, staggering because of the air pollution there. And so this is something, it's not just something that happens in India or Africa or, other parts of the world. Even here, in the United States, we see these issues where marginalized, vulnerable communities oftentimes face the brunt of these concerns. And taking it to the local level, we have a question in the chat box from a dear friend, Anutama Das from Washington, DC, from ISKCON. The question is around the ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is launching their own environmental program globally to green their temples and places of worship, and that they want to engage young people to be the kind of, because they have the energy and the spirit to do it. And so the question is, and this is an open question to all three of you, any advice how to connect and mobilize younger generation to take leadership at the local level? And I think that question is coming because I think, Falisha, you were getting at, younger people are very comfortable doing things on social media and getting messages out there, but how can we get younger people also to do work at a community level, which may be not as attractive to them, or maybe not what they're so used to? So anyone want to try and take a stab at that question?
The first thing that comes to my mind is when it comes to actually getting involved in an organization, we do it because of word of mouth. Like, for example, I have friends part of a certain organization and I don't want to miss out, so I'm going to join that organization. And I see this a lot when people do environmental cleanups. It's usually like a few people organize this beach cleanup or highway cleanup, and the people who do get involved are their friends. And another way is with social media, it's important to highlight that there are students that are going to be part of this. It's not just something that's being organized and handled only by adults. Because when we see people like ourselves getting involved, that's when we think, hey, maybe we should also get involved. Or for a lot of people, it is a way to make friends, which might not be the number one thing that might not be your goal, but for a lot of people, that is their goal. And so it is important to show that younger people are already involved, or they do have an interest in this. And take down our emails, because there are some people who do want to keep up with these events. There are some people who are just naturally very passionate, and although I guess it's very niche to find somebody like that, these people are the ones who create the most change. So having a strong student leader, I would say.
Great, that's really helpful. And I guess connected to that is another question, Nidhi, I guess more focused, directed at you, from Neil Roy. I think Neil is in Canada. So how can we be more effective and strategic in digital organizing, especially when there's so much spamming going on? And I think if we are Part of it, well, I think we're all Hindus here. I know that the Hindu WhatsApp groups kind of get overwhelmed very quickly early in the morning as well with all the forwards. And so any advice or suggestions on how to, cut through all the noise when we're doing digital organizing?
So you actually took some of the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to reference WhatsApp because it is a very popular platform in our community. One great way, especially even with WhatsApp, that is a form of digital organizing because it is a digital tool. Digital organizing is basically meeting people in spaces that they're in. WhatsApp, we often use it to share, greetings and things like that, but sharing information, share articles from reputable sources. Part of trying to get rid of the spamming, we have to be more active in trying to get rid of misinformation and have participate in disinformation campaigns. Providing graphics and visuals often do really well, or even sharing things from Bhumi Global or other groups that are focusing on environmental issues. Sharing from reputable sources will hopefully try to educate more folks, and then they will be encouraged to share that information from sources that that are telling the truth. And also having folks just, if you're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, sharing from those sources as well. If you have Facebook pages from environmental organizations or government agencies, trying to make sure people are building trust in those places, that will help fight that misinformation and disinformation campaign. I always make sure, I remember going in school, they were telling us you have to be very focused on citation and making sure you're not plagiarizing. I would treat the same with sharing things on social media platforms. If and the New York Times is a reputable source, I would share something from there, and then do your own research. You also need to make sure you're coming from influencers. There's social media influencers, there's celebrities, but then sharing information about environmental issues. Maybe you want to go to a scientist or the IPCC report. That those are places where I think would help with the disinformation and misinformation campaigns on social media or digital platforms.
Great, thank you so much. There's a question here. I want to see if I can ask it to Sujane, but I want to make sure you're still there because I know you have young children in your home. So if you can't answer it, it's fine. I'll direct it to Falisha and Nidhi. But the question is focused on younger people, and how do you deal with people who what's the point? It's too late. Just like a sense of who cares? We're past the tipping point when it comes to climate change. We're not going to hit the 2 degrees target by the end of the century. So, in our survey, we didn't actually. I think we got 4 people that said it. They didn't think it needed to be urgently addressed. So I think, at least in our survey, a lot of people. But obviously, that's someone who's interested in the environment is going to take an environmental survey. So it's a little bit. But I'm just wondering, do you come across people who are who cares? It's too late. And if so, how do you talk them into maybe taking a different approach? Sujane, if you're there, I would love to hear if you can respond to this. But if not, Nidhi and Falisha would also love to hear your responses as well. Oh, I see Sujane. Falisha, why don't you start and then we can, yeah.
So I think what I like to tell myself, because I do come across people like that all the time. For reference, I've been vegetarian my whole life and I don't usually talk about it, but when people find out that I am vegetarian, occasionally they'll be like, oh, what's the point? Animals are going to die anyways. The environment's going to be bad no matter what. Why are you vegetarian, right? And not that I mind answering these questions, but I think a lot of people are just hard-headed and they're not going to change. That is the reality, right? But let's say that there are 100 people in a room and 10 people are strong advocates for the environment. Another 10 people are strongly against doing anything. There are still 80 people that are undecided, right? 80 people who are still willing to listen to you. So why not divert the energy and focus on people who are willing to take action instead of draining your energy on ones who are against you from the start? And I think if you absolutely have to deal with people who are against you, I think just say something like, well, if the environment is already bad, do you want to make it worse by not doing anything? And that's about it.
Great, I love that. Yeah, focus on the positive people. Focus on rather than on the people who are downers. Sujane, good to see you back with us. I know you're probably dealing with some childcare issues there. So yeah, did you hear the question around dealing with people who are Debbie Downers, as we would say? Any advice on how to deal with them? Oh, we can't seem to hear you, Sujane. I'm not sure if.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. My little guy's right beside me. I think I have come across people like that for sure, especially working with schools. Like sometimes I hear that from young people when we pose a question or have them involved in some group activities. And kind of with what Falisha said, I think a really great powerful tool is when you see, other people that are engaged in the solution. And I think that kind of transforms people's views. Like I've seen like at the beginning of a workshop, like people that might be like really unengaged and they're like, what's the point of this, as you said? But then towards the end, as they hear the conversation and they hear other young people like really talking about how they could participate in the solution, it really changes the momentum. And by the end, they might be more interested, maybe not at an extreme level, but maybe at least a little bit more interested in learning more or hearing more. And I think that in itself is a very powerful change as well. Like if you're even willing to just put your ear against a story or an article or a book and learn a little bit more, like that can certainly put you on a different trajectory.
That's great. And all of you are so perfect because you answer a question and it tees it up for another question. So the next question which came through was around educational materials and resources. And so somebody asked, what are the books and educational materials that you would recommend so we can learn more about environmental issues? Nidhi, you already mentioned the New York Times, which is a great source for news on climate change. I'm just wondering if anyone else wants to share any books or studies or papers or magazines that you think could be helpful for anyone who wants to be more interested involved in this work.
I'd like to make a suggestion. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. There's Something in the Water by Ingrid Waldron, terrific social scientist from Canada, and it's all about environmental racism in Indigenous and Black communities. So I would, she uses a beautiful case study to kind of, her writing is just wonderful. So I would suggest that one.
Great. Nidhi, Falisha, any other suggestions on good books or resources?
Yeah, one book I know I was taught in graduate school, very popular in the United States, is Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and talks about the impacts of pesticides and kind of like led to people being more interested in environmental issues. Also, I mentioned like looking at the IPCC report that gets released, that has some great information. It can be very science heavy, but there's usually a lot of journalists that like break it down and provide some great information as well. And Columbia has an Earth Institute as well that has wonderful information that you can always find.
Great, thank you. Anything from you, Falisha, in terms of resources?
I wouldn't say reading books has ever helped me for the environment, but following vegan YouTubers and influencers on Instagram really has, because veganism does go hand in hand with the environment.
That's great. Yeah, I'll take the liberty and share a couple. So there's a great author in India called Dr. Nandita Krishna, and she has a great book published by Penguin India on, it's called Hinduism and Nature, and then 2 other books on sacred plants of India and sacred animals of India. And so they're great resources. You can just flick through them and you can learn about how a snake is, religious and sacred, or how a tortoise is, or a fish, or a kind of tree or shrub. It's really beautiful. But one of my favorite environmental books is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. The reason I like it is because when Thoreau went to Walden Pond for those 2 years, he took the Bhagavad Gita with him as one of the few books he had with him at the time. And so he references the Gita and the Manusmriti and other Hindu texts in that as well. So I find that's a great environmental book that draws on Hindu understandings as well. So Walden by Thoreau is my choice. Yeah, and I see someone in the chat put the Lorax, I think, for children. I think that's Dr. Seuss, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen it, but I'll add it to my list as well. We're coming up to the close of our time. I really want to thank all of our panelists for all your contributions this evening. It's been so good to like hear your reflections on the survey results, the work that you're doing, and like how you see this work going forward. And I think I want to end with that question is, what is your I don't want to say hope, but like what is your dream, or what is your vision, or what would you like to see from within the Hindu community here in North America when it comes to addressing environmental issues? What would you like to see them do going forward? Let's say in the next 8 years, because 2030 is a good marker when it comes to a lot of environmental issues. A lot of UN policies, are focused on 2030. So over the next 8 years, what would each of you like to see from within the Hindu community? How would you like to see them step up? And we'll go in the order that we started with. So Sujane, we'll start with you.
From the Hindu community, I'd like to see more intergenerational leadership and the intertwining of older views and newer perspectives together to tackle environmental challenges.
That's great. Thank you so much. Falisha.
I'd love to see just more Zoom events, more of us coming together. I think we do a lot of stuff in our personal lives for the environment, but I'd like to see us come together and take on collective missions.
Great. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a big country. Coming from England, I didn't appreciate how big North America was. And so I thought it was just Edison and Los Angeles and a few other places, but it's much bigger than that. So yeah, coming together in some way would be great. Nidhi, what would you like to see in the next coming years?
I'd like to see more Hindus just take leadership on these issues and sharing their experiences, because as many folks on the panel mentioned that, having that empathy and perspective is important. And there's a lot of things that we already bring to the conversation just in our daily lives with what we practice as Hindus. Even vegetarianism is gaining popularity. So I think having more of our perspectives out there and not being afraid to share them, because we have a lot of value in what we bring.
Great. Thank you, Nidhi. And thank you again to all of our panelists for this really, really rich discussion. And thank you to all of you who dialed in tonight to be with us and for the rich conversation and questions that came in through the chat box. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. If you want to see the results of our survey, you can go to our website, bhumiglobal.org, where you can see the full results. You can also sign up to our newsletter there as well, so you can be informed about when these events are happening again. Somebody asked if we'll be doing another survey this year. We don't have plans to do the same survey, but we may do another kind of survey to get a bit more of a sense in terms of what the Hindu community is thinking and feeling. And then an announcement of a new initiative that we are launching in the coming weeks. The reason I said 2030 is because we are going to be working with about 15 to 25 Hindu organizations across the world, helping them develop long-term action plans for the environment. Because what we found is that oftentimes people struggle to know what to do immediately. But if we think about more of a decade or a 10-year framework, it's easier to plan something over a 10-year framework than necessarily trying to do it all immediately. And so we'll be launching that program in the coming weeks. We'll be working, as I said, with about 15 to 25 Hindu groups globally. And so if you want to be part of that program, where we'll work with you very, very closely to develop your own action plan for the next decade for your own community or temple or organization, please do contact us. It'll be a 6-month program, and then we'll be launching all the action plans here in New York City in October. And so we'd love for you to be part of that. And so if you're interested in seeing how to get your community involved, our long-term action plan program is the one for you. So please sign up to our email us, and we'd love to have you involved in that. So that's all. It's 9 o'clock. We have ice cream to eat or kids to put to sleep or TV to watch. So we'll leave you there. But thank you again to our panelists. Thank you all to the participants, and look forward to seeing you again on one of our webinars very shortly. Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Record.